Hey, how's it going, everybody? Sean here for another movie review. Today, we're going to be talking about 1993's Cliffhanger. The film is directed by Renny Harlin, written by Michael France, John Long, and others. It stars Sylvester Stallone, John Lithgow, Michael Rooker, Janine Turner, Rex Lynn, Carolyn Goodall, Leon, Greg Fabras, Gregory Scott Cummins, Dennis Forrest, Michael Jorner, Max Perlich, and others. The logline plot synopsis is: a botched midair heist results in suitcases full of cash being searched for by various groups throughout the Rocky Mountains. Okay, well, that's a way to put it. So, yeah, 1993's Cliffhanger. It had been a long time since I had seen this movie, since I had actually sat down, properly watched the whole thing through. Probably back the last time I watched it would have been when I owned the VHS tape. It's probably been that long. So probably late 90s, I would say, because I adopted DVD pretty early. So it must have been in the late 90s sometime. And I didn't really have much of an opinion about it. Like, for some reason, I always, in my mind's eye, I was always like, oh, it's kind of like a middling Stallone thing. You know, he does a couple movies after this, like around the same time, Demolition Man being one, The Specialist, Assassins, and then he kind of fades away. You know, he goes through like a 10-year period of kind of relative obscurity after this. Like, he just can't get a hit. He's not able to, I don't know, finance his pictures correctly because, you know, he comes from the school of filmmaking in the 80s. Arnold kind of suffered a very similar fate, whereas they were kind of divas. They had a lot of say in productions, and things kind of shifted. They shifted a little bit in Hollywood, right? They became more kind of like concept focused. Everything was high concept. Everything was ensemble. Everything was more spectacle driven, rather than back in like the 80s and early 90s where things were kind of more star power driven. We would go see movies just because Arnold Schwarzenegger was in it, Sylvester Stallone was in it, you know, Bruce Willis, like people like that. They would actually drive you to the theater to go see something, rather than what it is more nowadays, which nowadays we live in a completely different landscape, even beyond that, where it's like IP driven. It's like known property driven stuff. That is what ends up being our big draws, our big tentpoles, our big money makers, right? But there was a time, a golden era, where these guys had all the control in Hollywood, all the control over their productions. And a lot of times that led to a lot of middling results. I would say Stallone, most definitely. And we've gone through a bunch of Stallone films. Some of his 80s stuff like Nighthawks, Tango and Cash, Cobra over the past year. And those productions were kind of riddled with problems, a lot of them having directly to do with Sylvester Stallone and his behavior, his attitude, and, you know, kind of firing directors and firing editors and production designers while in the midst of shooting, rewriting things on the fly, directing things himself sometimes. And things kind of settled down, and by 1993, and he does Cliffhanger. Now, granted, he definitely, this is part of like the boys, what's his name? Cassar, the producer, Dino De Laurentiis, like all those kind of guys. Although I don't think Dino had anything to do with this, but so like he was, I think it seems like he kind of took a step back and just offered his star power to this more so than he had in other movies. Demolition Man, I think, is another example of that, where he seemed like maybe a little bit more low key in terms of like his hands on the production, and he delivered this kind of action vehicle Cliffhanger, which, coming back to it, man, it's a great action movie. It's a super fun movie. I did not realize how good it was. Like, it is one of these things that just kind of hits every note perfectly. It's perfectly paced. The script has every kind of element that you need, even if it's just enough, you know, to give our a sense of character. The casting is fantastic. Just the effects work is great, even for the time. It holds up pretty well today. You know, it's almost like a novelty now. You go back and watch this stuff and see all the great matte paintings and the great set design and the great special effects of the era and how they were able to accomplish kind of these crazy things back in 1993. It's kind of cool just to see it. And I really love the aesthetic. I don't know why. I just really love the aesthetic of like a matte painting and a set put together. I don't know why. It's probably nostalgia. It's probably just something because I watched so many movies that utilized that in the 80s and 90s, but there you go. Yeah, and it's just a perfectly, like I said, perfectly paced. The movie's always offering something new. It smartly has this kind of dynamic where it's like, not just like man versus terrorist, but also like man versus nature. Like that is just as big of a obstacle for Arnold, or not for Arnold, for Stallone and even Michael Rooker's character to kind of overcome. And I think they smartly give the movie like an A and B plot, so you're never really too tired of anything. Like it does actually follow the terrorists, like John Lithgow and crew, pretty closely. Like you get a lot of stuff, and that's where you get the interactions with Michael Rooker, who takes what could be kind of a thankless, nothing role, and I think really elevates it because he just invests in it. Like you kind of buy into the way he feels about it, you know? The way he feels about what's going on, the way he reacts to things that are happening. Like, it's a good performance in a movie that didn't require that. And I would say that across the board. Everybody's kind of giving a little something extra special. You know, a lot of people really like John Lithgow in this movie. He's the villain, kind of this vaguely European bad guy. And he's having a lot of fun. He's very hammy. In fact, I would say out of most of the performances, it's the villains that are the most kind of stock 90s bad guys. Like they feel the most almost cartoony in a way, juxtaposed from everybody else. Because Stallone, to bring it back to Stallone, like Stallone is actually giving kind of a more like nuanced, subtle performance in the scenes where he's able to do so. I mean, even the beginning of the movie, right? There's this whole thing that happens. This woman falls off from a line as she's trying to cross this big mountain crevice, big hole. She's going from point A to point B. Her strap gets loose and breaks, and Stallone tries to save her, and he has tons of guilt and everything like that. It causes a conflict between him and Michael Rooker, and but it's like a great scene, and he's great in it, and it's utilizing like his star power, but also utilizing like his unique sense of vulnerability, like what the things that made Stallone like a star, Rambo, Rocky. Those are not like hard ass action hero guys. I mean, they evolved into that as those series went on, as the 80s went on, and those kind of productions, the excess of those things. But that's kind of what makes Stallone such an interesting presence, because he is a little bit of both worlds, right? He can actually kind of act. That's kind of sets him apart from somebody like Arnold. Now, that's not to take away from Arnold. Like, I love 80s Arnold. And, a lot of his stuff, his success is predicated on the type of script it is or the director. Like, he has to have somebody that really can hone in on and make an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, where I feel like Stallone is more versatile because he just has a bigger range, And he's able to actually utilize some of that range in Cliffhanger, surprisingly enough. I was kind of taken aback. I just forgot, I guess. I guess so fuck me. But I just kind of forgot how generous of a performer he is, even in the context of this kind of big, dumb action movie. Because don't get me wrong, it's a big, dumb action movie. It's just more subtler, a little more nuanced than you probably would expect from something called Cliffhanger. Just a few thoughts about Renny Harlin. Renny Harlin's a director that I don't particularly like a lot of his movies. You probably know him from, he did Cutthroat Island. He starts back in the day as working, and one of his first big things that he did when he came to America was Nightmare on Elm Street 4, which I don't know if it's anybody's favorite Nightmare on Elm Street. He did Die Hard 2, The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, then he does Cliffhanger. So he kind of establishes himself as a very solid, workman-like director. And he's like a studio man. Renny Harlin doesn't seem like the kind of guy, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. He's not the kind of guy that has like some sort of strong authorial vision. He just kind of gets hired by studios, or if it's something he develops himself, it's usually, because I guess you could say like Cutthroat Island is kind of his thing. The Long Kiss Goodnight, both starring his wife, Gina Davis, or his wife at the time, Gina Davis, both vehicles for her. The motivation there is different than like somebody who's like an auteur, kind of like a Spielberg or a Kubrick or something like that, right? Or a David Fincher. Like, he just doesn't have that kind of stamp, but he's very competent. He can competently execute on these kind of big things, these big action set pieces. He can tell a story from A to B to C. You're not going to be lost, or most of the time. I know he's gotten worse as the years have gone on. At least the projects he's involved himself have gotten worse. I mean, like Exorcist, the beginning, The Covenant, 12 Rounds, Mindhunters, which I think I know what Mindhunters is. I remember being particularly bad. Is this the one? Yeah, it's got Val Kilmer, LL Cool J, Christian Slater. Yeah, trainees in the FBI psychological profiling program must put their training into practice when they discover a killer in their midst. So he's just kind of a jobber, competently able to do that kind of like do things like that. So in some respects, he maybe is a good director for this material. Although, having said all of that, and I think all of that stuff is true, he does bring a little extra juice to this movie in the way he shoots it, especially the action. He is kind of, there's a self-awareness to the action and about how over the top and even in moments gratuitous it is. There's like lots of crazy slow motion. There's just like this willingness to shoot stuff in a way that is like exploitative. And it ends up kind of enhancing the movie. It gives it a kitschy quality almost. Like there is, like I said, it's a little self-aware. I mean, one of the craziest shots in the movie, in my opinion, is that in the beginning when the woman slips out of Stallone's hands and she's falling, and it's like this really long scene. There are several cuts to her terrified face as she's falling. There's like several cuts to it. Like, so he was just really like trying to amp it up. He's like, this is dramatic. And the same thing every time any like really like big violent moment or somebody gets like an innocent person, a victim gets like shot down by the terrorist, like he gives it like some sort of attention that you could make the argument that's like it's there for dramatic effect, and maybe it makes you kind of drills home the idea that this is a bad thing that's happening, but it's also like makes it kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, like elegant, like cinematic. It's like a Zack Snyder moment, you know? And so in fairness to Renny Harlin, just having kind of shit on him a little bit, I think that is totally his input, totally his director's vision as far as you can have one with a movie like this. Because everything else is pretty standard stuff. Like it's not like there's not like a lot of like crazy cool cinematography. Although one of the best parts of the movie, one of the more impressive things, is the airplane heist, where they have to go from one airplane to another and they go on a zip line. It's actually, from what I understand, most people look at this as being the most impressive set pieces that involve something like that. And it really wasn't topped until Christopher Nolan did it in The Dark Knight Rises, because it has a very kind of similar scene. And I'd agree, because it's, you know, it's back in this day, back in a time period where stunts were stunts. Everything was done pretty practically. Like I said, even with like having to build a set and extend it with a matte painting or something like that. Like fundamentally though, somebody had to do a lot of this shit. And it shows. It shows. Even like, you know, people climbing up mountainsides and crazy stuff like free climbing. Apparently Renny Harlin was like, there's a scene where the guy who's the stand-in for Stallone, he's like on the mountain face and he's climbing up. And Renny Harlin was bitching because he's like, the safety harness is in the scene, it's in the way. And this is before you could just paint things out. So the guy actually just did it without the safety harness. Like just total free, what is it? Free climbing. You ever see that documentary about that free climber dude? Eat your heart out, free climber guy. People were doing it in fucking Cliffhanger years ago. But yeah, and it gives it just this extra quality. It gives it something special. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed most of like the physical fights and stuff. And I also like that Stallone was at this point in his career where he almost like kind of knew a little bit better than maybe he had in the prior 10 years before this, and letting his ego go a little bit, because he lets his character get the shit kicked out of him, which is something you would imagine like, oh, you know, that's something, a staple of at least some of his movies, like especially like the Rocky movies. Like it's like he gets the shit kicked out of him and then finds a way to overcome. This one, it's like even more extreme. Like I was like, holy shit, like they really just put Stallone through the physical ringer in terms of like on screen, like him getting his ass kicked. And that was cool, because you don't see that a lot with movies with these guys, these big action guys. Not in the way, not to the extent at least that it's showcased in Cliffhanger. But yeah, Cliffhanger rocks, dude. No pun intended. I was so happy that I watched it, because I just kind of watched it on a whim. And if anybody else is interested, it's on Amazon Prime right now. And if you have a 4K TV and unlimited data from your internet provider, you can watch it in 4K. You can watch it in the UHD, streaming UHD, which is not the same as the disc. But I tell you what, though, I like this so much that when I see that 4K Blu-ray on sale somewhere for like $10 or whatever, I'm definitely going to get it. It's a cool movie. It's a cool-ass movie, man. probably my favorite Renny Harlin movie. I mean, maybe The Long Kiss Goodnight. I don't know if that edges it out, but I also like the Long Kiss Goodnight. Die Hard 2. I've never really been into Die Hard 2. That's probably my least favorite Die Hard movie. Well, other than A Good Day to Die Hard, was that the last one they did? Other than that one. Of the original trilogy of Die Hard movies, my least favorite. But yeah. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for Facebook, for Instagram, for my Twitter, for my brother Dan's Twitter. Also, check out our other YouTube channel. It's like a backup one. And follow us on DLive. It's like a live streaming site. It's kind of an alternative to Twitch. It uses blockchain technology to do its service or its streaming service. We're just kind of looking at alternative things that aren't maybe the most popular ones. Because one, we can get away with a lot more, and number two, don't give these companies the monopoly just because they exist, you know? So anyways, you guys have the best one ever, and go watch Cliffhanger right now. Go do it.